Hello, this is Dr. James Rivera, and I'd like to invite you to our ongoing conversation about world literature. So far, the world literature that you've read this semester includes selections from the Book of Genesis, the Enuma Elish, the Zhuangzi, um, Ava's Metamorphosis, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Epic of Sunjata. These are texts from a variety of periods from around the world. Many of them are creation texts, but not all of them. Some of them involve a dialogue between two or more people about humanity's place in the world and who we're supposed to be. Now, these texts collected collectively in this course represent the first unit of instruction, which covers the body and its environment. And creation texts really fit well with that consideration because they elaborate who human beings are, where we came from, and where we fit in with our immediate physical environments. That has a lot to do with how we think of ourselves, with our anthropologies. And while these texts are all very old, they still provided some basic ideas that are still current all around the world in different cultures. So they're still worth studying today. Now, you also have learned so far this semester a few different ways of approaching literature. And in last week's unit, I encourage you to think about the interpretation of literature as pattern recognition. And some of your other readings have given you some guidance in the area of pattern recognition and what that means in literary study. So the first form of pattern recognition that you learned from Julia Kristeva and her co-authors was seeking out binary oppositions in a text. So if you look at these creation accounts or these dialogues, who is talking to whom about what? What different positions do they represent? Are there multiple agents involved in creation, and are they at odds with one another, and what are they? The book of Genesis, separation of light from dark and dry ground from the oceans, the waters. These all represent different kinds of oppositions. Now, where does humanity stand in relationship to that discussion? And is our thinking now limited to those oppositions? How do we resolve those? How have we learned to resolve those in our own thinking? Or how are we resolving them? Or maybe how are we continuing to repeat them? Those are all questions you can ask about your readings. You also learn from another reading that it appears to be we've learned quite a bit, and this is becoming more and more important in medical humanities, that it's not just a matter of our physical bodies moving out into the world, into our environments and changing it, but the shape of our environments and our interactions with it shape the way we think and what we believe about the world. And some of these beliefs are reflected in different world religions. So it's not just a matter of a simple your body acts in the environment and changes it, or your environmental factors determine what you think and you're just a passive recipient of that process, but an interaction of these two opposing forces again, your body on the environment and the environment on your body. And to some extent, these affect what we believe or have in the past at least. So these are all things that you can look for in your readings as you read. You don't necessarily need to know everything about the text to look for these patterns, but you have been provided some supplemental video lectures on each of these texts that can give you some background and a bigger picture on them, and I'd like to encourage you to watch them. And that bigger picture may help you understand your reading a little bit more. But I'd like to encourage you, whatever you do, make sure you do the reading. That's the real payoff for any literature course, is doing the reading. So as you proceed through your readings this week, look for patterns, look for opposing forces, look for ways that the environment determines what we think about humanity, and look for ways that humanity is presumed to have an effect on its environment. Look for people engaged in a dialogue. Do they represent opposing positions? And what are they? And what do those opposing positions say about human beings? All of that affects how people view themselves in their immediate social and environmental and physical contexts. And that all affects how people respond to notions of health and sickness. So our next unit is going to go into conceptions of health and sickness, and it's going to be divided into readings that present like an ideal body, a perfect state, something like that first half of the binary opposition that Julia Kristeva described in the Cura myth. And then the second readings describe states of sickness and disease and the emotional experiences we have associated with both of those states. So this whole setup here, the first 2 weeks of class or so, 2 or 3 weeks, you can think of as world building. What's the stage in which the human body is set and in which we experience health and sickness and caregiving? And then the next unit, we'll talk about how we talk about health or the ideal body and sickness itself. And we'll get into more of that later. In the meantime, do the reading, and if you have any questions, be sure to ask your instructor, and maybe ask your peers too, see what they think, especially if it's about how to interpret the literature. Because literary interpretation is not a matter of finding one right answer. It's also not a matter of anything goes. It's subjective, but it's not arbitrary. It's guided by the words on the page, and it's guided by the historical context out of which those words came. So do the reading, engage it, and think about it, and reason about it in some detail. Pay attention to details and include those details in your discussion of the text. Talk to you later.